Good morning once again, my brothers and sisters. God has allowed us another day of life. So it's another good day to study His Word. And here we find ourselves today in Numbers chapter 21. We've seen some things already in Numbers 21 where there's been a bit of a rebellion that was quelled by snake bites and a remedy of God asking or telling Moses to build a bronze snake that's on a pole, and that anybody that looks to that will be healed from the snake bites. I hope you remember that from last time. But now the Israelite community is on the move. And let's just review for a second. They travel from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. Remember, the king of Edom refused to let them go through. So they have to go around, but the people grew impatient on the way. This is what began the rebellion that ended in the deaths of many through the snake bites. But let's just look at the geography for a second as we think about it. Here's Mount Hor, okay? So that's where they start. Let's see here. Let's try something new today, all right? You ready? If you're at Mount Hor, let's see. Never mind. Maybe I can't do it. Here we go. I just want you to see this little blue line. They have to walk down and around this kingdom of Edom, all right, because he won't let them pass. And now they're going up to Moab in this area. Eventually, by the end of this passage, they'll end up way north, up here almost to the Sea of Galilee. Just so you understand where we are in terms of the journey. All right, so we go from there to Edom. They have to go around. They're going towards Moab. All right, perfect. What does it tell us when we get to verse 8? You remember, just to recall again one more time, that God tells Moses to make a snake, put it on a pole. If you're bitten by the snake through your own choice to disobey and grumble against God, if you look to that snake, you're going to live. Moses does that, and when anyone was bitten by a snake, he looked at the bronze snake and he lived. I just want you to understand that this is the cycle we're going to see. We've already seen it repeated many times, but the people, they come to a place where they decide they're going to obey God, and then they receive God's blessing, His provision, His protection, His care. But what happens? Then they decide that they don't like it. They want to sin against God. They're going to worship false idols eventually, as we have already seen with the golden calf. God brings punishment through judgment once the suffering reaches a certain level, as we just saw in the snake bite episode. They repent. God, please help us. God forgives, and they begin to obey again. God keeps this going for one simple reason. He promised Abraham. In other words, no matter how off track the Israelite community gets, because God has promised Abraham that his descendants would be more numerous than the stars in the sky, and his descendants would inherit the promised land, this promise is a guarantee by God. And so their entry into the promised land, the people's entry, isn't really about how well they're doing. Despite all their fallenness and all their mistakes and all the times they have to go around this cycle of horribleness, right? They still hardly ever learn the lesson. But nonetheless, God is going to make sure that this people group, as flawed as they may be, enters the promised land, not because of them, but because of Him. He promised. He never lies. So as we move into the passage today, the Israelites moved on and camped at Oboth. And then they set out from Oboth and camped in Ir Abarim, in the desert that faces Moab toward the sunrise. Now they're on the east side, all right? From there, they moved on and camped in the Zered Valley. Then they set out from there and camped alongside the Arnon, which is in the desert extending into Amorite territory. Okay, the Arnon is the border of Moab, between Moab and the Amorites, Who are the Amorites? Well, we probably know them best as occupying the land of Canaan. But the Amorites are a huge people group. In fact, they are credited with starting the city of Babylon. So they extend well to the east of modern-day Israel. But these are the people that the Israelites are going to conquer through the power of God to be allowed to move into the promised land that God has promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the whole community. All right, so the group is moving north on the east side of the Dead Sea. We're given a little footnote here in verse 14. That is why the book of the wars. What's that? The book of the wars. This is apparently a writing of antiquity that's been lost to us. But nonetheless, the author of this book, Moses, references it because he knows the people of his day would understand what this is. The book of the wars of the Lord says, Waheb and Suphah and the ravines, the Arnon and the slopes of the ravines that lead to the site of Ar and lie along the border of Moab. In other words, the Bible is specific and it is very historical. It wants to make sure we get exactly where it is, even though here we are some 3,000 to 4,000 years later. We have lost the exact locations of many of these places, but nonetheless, the Bible is quick to make sure we understand we're reading a historical document that is talking about real places. All right. From there, they continued on to Beer, the well where the Lord said to Moses, gather the people together and I will give them water. And then Israel sang this song, spring up, O well, sing about it, about the well that the princes dug and the nobles of the people sank, the nobles with scepters and staffs. In other words, there's a historical recollection here of what God has done in this region. Then they went from the desert to Mattanah, all right? From Mattanah to Nahaliel, from Nahaliel to Bamath, and from Bamath to the valley of Moab, where the top of Pisgah overlooks the wasteland. Notice how specific this all is. Again, if we could physically go to this Middle East area and walk these places, we would see more clearly the exact markers that are being referenced here, but obviously I have to work. I can't go, or I could go take pictures for you. But in the end, again, what's the point for us? This is a history. This isn't some theological, ethereal writing about being in oneness. No, this is location, movement to a new place, landmarkers that show us where they are, what they're doing. Israel sent messengers to say to Sihon, king of the Amorites, let us pass through your country. We will not turn aside into any field or vineyard or drink water from any well. We will travel along the king's highway until we have passed through your territory. This is the same thing that was suggested to the king of Edom, and the Israelites get a similar response. But Sihon would not let Israel pass through his territory. He mustered his entire army and marched out into the desert against Israel. When he reached Jahaz, he fought with Israel. What are we seeing here? Sihon, this guy doesn't even try to say, no, thanks, you can't come through. There's no negotiation. There's no discussion. We're just going to get the army and come after you and attack you. Why would he do that? I mean, this shows us that the reputation of the Israelites is preceding them. All right, Sihon has obviously heard about the God that Israel serves. He's heard about the deliverance from Egypt and the elimination of the Egyptian army. I mean, I do believe that the Israelites at this stage, through their reputation by what God has done, they are a feared people. Sihon, he doesn't even want to talk. Let me just go kill you. That's his solution. Israel, however, put him to the sword. Wow, that didn't work out, did it, Sihon? But just understand, Israel is gaining momentum, gaining power, and never forget that God himself is leading the attack on these pagan nations. Why would God do that? Because of their idolatry, because they refuse to serve the living God. You say, how would they know about him? Well, Romans 1 tells us all creation testifies to the living God. Romans 2 tells us every one of us is born with the law of God in our hearts. They have ample evidence to understand that pagan worship is not appropriate, and yet they refuse to know God. Okay, God says, I'm going to use my people as an arm of judgment as well as keep my promise. Israel, however, put him to the sword and took over his land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, but only as far as the Ammonites, because their border was fortified. So there is a problem for Israel to keep going, but Israel captured all the cities of the Amorites and occupied them, including Heshbon and all its surrounding settlements. Heshbon was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab and taken from him all his land as far as Arnon. All right, we're going to look at a map in a second. That is why the poets say, come to Heshbon and let it be rebuilt. Let Sihon's city be restored. Fire went out from Heshbon, a blaze from the city of Sihon. It consumed Ar of Moab, the citizens of Arnon's heights. Again, what should we get out of all this? History. Woe to you, O Moab. You are destroyed, O people of Chemosh. Who's Chemosh? A false god. Moab is a pagan nation serving a false god. We know from the book of Corinthians that all false gods have their origination in demonic activity. To worship an idol is to worship a demon. He has given up his sons as fugitives and his daughters as captives to Sihon, king of the Amorites. This is discussing how Sihon did conquer them in the past, but we have overthrown them. Heshbon is destroyed all the way to Dibon. We have demolished them as far as Nophah, which extends to Medeba. Wow. These are places to think about. I want you to see this map for a second, okay? I'm not sure I did this correctly. I hope I can fix it. I might have a problem right here. But here's the map. This is where they were in Jezrah, right? Or Jazer, it's called. They're going up north. They're almost, if you see this, they're almost as far north as the Sea of Galilee. Do you see that? It's a very interesting path they have to go to enter the promised land. But just let me read to you verses 31 and 2, since through my zeal I have covered it by the map. I'll read it to you. So Israel settled in the land of the Amorites. That would be this whole area, honestly. Verse 32, after Moses had sent spies to Jazer, that's in the bottom part of the map, the Israelites captured its surrounding settlements and drove out the Amorites who were there. So we see that Israel is now conquering nations through the power of God. And we're watching the journey. They're not where they're going to end up, but they're wiping out the kings on the way. Verse 33, then they turned and went up along the road toward Bashan. You remember that was at the top of that last map we saw. And Og, king of Bashan, and his whole army marched out to meet them in battle at Edrei. The Lord said to Moses, look at this, do not be afraid of him, for I have handed him over to you with his whole army and his land. Do to him what you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon. So as they move north, they get to this King Og, and God says, look, you don't have to have any fear. Don't worry about how big it looks, how hard it might be. I am handing him over to you. So the Lord himself is providing the power to defeat the enemies that they have to defeat to enter the land that God has promised. So they struck him down, together with his sons and his whole army, leaving them no survivors, and they took possession of his land. So what's God doing in all this? as the Israelite community moves into the promised land. I mean, some people say, well, gee, that God of the Old Testament, he's just vicious. He's killing all these innocent people. Well, guess what? These people have defied God repeatedly for centuries, having been given the information necessary to know that God is and that they owe him their obedience. And God is saying, look, I am going to show myself powerful by taking out the Egyptians and taking out every community of people that's against me. He is taking them out, not out of his willingness to kill people. I mean, death is a part of life, right? Everybody dies, and whether they die because Israel rolled in or they die because they got old, death is still an eventuality for every one of these people groups. But in the end, God is showing himself to be faithful to his promise and to be powerful enough to make his promise a reality. The Israelites will end up exactly where God promised them to be, and we'll see that as we move forward, church. God bless you. Serve him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who he is? He's the image of the invisible God, and he's the brightness of his glory, the first, the last, the future.